Hello. Hello, hello. Today we're talking about gender inclusive coaching and what that means. Hello, hello. Today we're talking about gender inclusive coaching because I'm hosting a workshop on Saturday where I'm going to be exploring this in a lot more detail. And the reason why I'm offering this workshop is because I'm seeing every single time I post about gender, that post goes viral. So clearly there is a lot of demand and interest in discussing this topic. And there's also a lot of passion around it. Like a lot of folks feel very, very passionately. And I really want to be able to unpack it. So we're going to unpack some of it a little bit today. There is so much to talk about. That's why the workshop is 3 hours long. But we'll start with, definitely if you have questions about gender frameworks, the way that gender is being used in New Age spaces, feel free to ask. Hi, everyone. Hello to whoever's coming. And this is such a last minute live, so I'm excited for whoever's here. So if you want to say hello, and if you have any questions about gender in New Age frameworks, I know a lot of you in this community are here because you're passionate about inclusivity, you're passionate about making sure that the frameworks you're using are empowering to everybody. If we're in this space of wanting to offer advice and thought leadership to others, then it's important to also invite reflection into our own frameworks. So that's what we're doing here. And we're doing it with the utmost love and, nurturing and learning energies. Let me know, it's 5 o'clock, so the roads outside are pretty busy. So if you're hearing background noise, let me know because I can totally close the window. But yeah, so hello, always a pleasure. Definitely want more inclusive language in the spiritual world. Yes, I'm so glad that you're here. And I'll start by saying this, is that gender inclusive coaching it's going to go beyond just the language of making sure that pronouns are inclusive and that people are really fluent in the language of pronouns, and because that's a very, very important step. But it's I almost think of it as kind of like a band-aid that doesn't really cover the deeper issue. The deeper issue is that the framework itself can contribute to non-binary and trans and queer erasure. So we can say that our framework is collective and it's for everybody, but in practice, and theoretically, ideologically, how the framework is set up is already rooted in that kind of erasure. So let's get this is very meta, but we can get a little bit more concrete. How in the world do I guide and coach others while at the same time learning and developing myself? That's a very good question. And I think it is absolutely possible to guide others while you're still growing yourself. I think part of the danger is that some folks in the spiritual coaching industry market themselves as experts and as having all the answers and having it all figured out. And therefore they say I have it figured out, work with me, I'm going to help fix you. And that dynamic is, first of all, it's not realistic. We're all still learning, we're all still growing. Even if we have areas of expertise, there are other areas that we're still learning, we're still growing. So saying and positing your entire platform on this idea that you have it all figured out, it's creating this illusion for your followers as well that they can also have it all figured out. And I personally much prefer like embracing a messier framework and saying like, hey, I don't have all the answers. I don't have it all figured out. These are the answers I do have and that are working for me. So let me acknowledge my positionality. Let me acknowledge where I'm situated. Let me also embrace and acknowledge my blind spots and say like, these are the things I'm still learning. I'm not perfect. These are the things that I've worked on and that I've learned, that have worked for me. And this is where I can share with you. And I think that makes it a lot more human and a lot more like imperfect and embracing that imperfectness, as opposed to like positing ourselves as like perfection and putting ourselves on a pedestal, and then other people have to like look up to us as a, you know. So it's coming from a place of watching how when folks put themselves on that pedestal, it creates this power dynamic that makes it like, oh, I have the authority and I'm just going to tell you what to do and what to think. And, you know, it just creates that like dynamic that isn't the most empowering or supportive. I know it's just hard to put on the persona of someone who has answers and guidance, but at the same time, being like, I don't have all the answers is a difficult balance. This is the thing, like the people who are going to say, I have all the answers are going to attract folks who don't have all the answers and are probably in vulnerable positions. So I'm more concerned about like, well, if you present yourself as having all the answers, you're almost kind of like setting up for a codependent dynamic where someone is coming to you because they don't have all the answers and you're presenting yourself as having all the answers. And that, you know, I think we should also embrace and normalize like being experts, but also being humble. And at the same time, I also want to caveat what is expertise. Like expertise, it's, I believe that education is very important for expertise. Does it mean that we have to go to school for expertise? I have a conflicted relationship to school. I have a lot of degrees and like spent a lot of time in education. I think it's like a little bit of a scam, honestly. And I think it is incredibly draining and difficult. Some of my favorite intellectuals didn't go to school and they're incredibly smart. So it's not about like the institution. It's about like, I need to see you with a book in hand and you need to be studying. Like, I don't care if it's at school or on your own. Like, to be an expert, you need to read, you need to spend years studying the thing that you claim to be an expert on. So like 3 months of like a certificate, that doesn't give someone expertise. That like, to me, my standards for what an expert is are very high. And like, for instance, and expertise is also very deep, right? You're drilling deep into a topic. And so it's being honest about what we're experts about and what's beyond the scope of our expertise, to be very open and transparent about that. So that's also like a red flag when someone presents themselves as like knowing everything about the universe, right? It's just not possible. And do we really want to encourage that dynamic of like, come to me because I have all the answers, all the cheat codes? So I think it's okay to embrace our imperfectness, to say, this is what I'm good at, and this is where I can help you. And you can, of course, still help people without necessarily being an expert. You can just be an expert on your own experience, and that's enough. You don't have to be an expert on like a topic. The way that like I consider myself an expert on capitalism and decolonization, I spent 6 years studying it in a high intensive doctoral program. So, but am I an expert in theology? Am I an expert on Christianity? No, you know, I could research it, but I'm definitely not going to be at the same level as someone who's like a professor of theology. Am I a spiritual coach? Not really. I've taken some like certificates, and I took a yoga certificate as well. And I'm like, it's not enough for me to call myself a spiritual coach, or for me to even like want to be in that area. Like, that's being in charge of people's like well-being, whether it's physical or emotional or mental or spiritual. I was like, that's a lot of responsibility that, you know, I am not equipped. Anyway, wow, so many. Let me just take a look. Hopefully this is help wrap your head around that balance. This is obviously just my perspective. We're always working on our next stage of growth. Yeah, we're always evolving, and I think it's important to model that and normalize that and embrace that. Can you accept my live guest? I don't think I saw your invitation. Experience that can be validated in some way is also more trustworthy. Absolutely. Personal experience is very important. The one thing I'll be careful about is like the jump from personal experience to theory. So just because it's a personal experience doesn't mean it's universalizable. And part of the problem we see in spiritual spaces is that there's so much about this like universality of like, it happened to me, therefore it can happen to everyone else. And this is also coming from like feminist frameworks. Being open and transparent about our positionality is very important, because it's acknowledging that like, okay, my experience with manifestation, like theoretically, say I was doing manifestation and be like, okay, I'm able to manifest because I come from a middle-class family, I'm light-skinned, I live in North America, I have this privilege, that's why manifestation is working for me. You know what I mean? That's so important. As opposed to trying to take on this like omniscient, godlike position to say manifestation can work for everyone. It is a universal law. So you see the difference between being honest about our personal experience and say, this worked for me, this doesn't work for me. I can see how like there are systemic barriers. So being more nuanced with our language is super helpful as well. And it's wholesome, like especially if you're in a position of guiding other people, mentoring other people, it's so important to be nuanced. And we see very little nuance when people try to aspire to universality and just talk about like general rules like that. Like we're almost always setting ourselves up for trouble, because there is no such thing as universality. And in fact, the history of universality is super colonial and white supremacist. So we're going to look at that in my decolonization workshop. Like the very concept of universality is Western and it's colonial. Yeah. You're an expert at no things. You're okay. Like that's the thing. Like I don't think expertise, like I think expertise in my position, for instance, is important because I'm a teacher, right? So online I do like, in terms of my content creation, like I'm educating and I'm teaching theory and I'm helping people like put words to ideas and concepts. And like I teach history and social history and political theory and intellectual thought. Is that necessary for everybody? I don't think it's necessary. I don't think so. But I do think it's important to learn, because that learning is going to contribute to the spaces that you're in and the people that you work with. Like the learning is essential. The being a constant learner and wanting to invite pause and reflection and study, that's very important. Yes, absolutely. There aren't answers. There are tools we can learn to work with and apply to our lives. And that's where experience comes in as well. Like if you're experienced with a specific tool, if you've learned that tool works in certain situations, especially if you're approaching that tool from a decolonial perspective with a lot of nuance, with a lot of awareness, that's also very helpful. Like I think part of the expertise is really narrowing down and experimenting and learning and solidifying your relationship to that one thing so that you can help others embrace it or work with it as well. Hi, Julia Leah. Been trying to manifest land back and it's not happened yet. Yeah, there are some people who talk about like radical manifestation, like manifesting, equality and rights and like a different kind of abundance that isn't like capitalist abundance. But personally, I find that manifestation framework is just a little too close to prayer and Christianity. And I'm just like, I think there's better ways to talk about like, advocating for our rights and advocating for what we need that doesn't have to go through that mystical channel. Personally, I'm like, we have so much to learn from history in terms of like revolutions and social movements and what worked and what didn't. And those frameworks, none of them like involved manifestation. So why is it that now all of a sudden manifestation has taken a hold? And I think it's because it's like usually mostly like very individualistic of like, I'm just going to figure out my own thing and like not think about, yeah. A. Sloan, manifestation reminds me of the prosperity gospel. Yes, exactly. It is. It's very similar. Spirituality functions under the subjective paradigm. Science functions under the objective paradigm. Oh my God, Kat. Definitely spirituality is subjective. I will push back on science being objective. That's, you know, I think it's beyond the scope of this discussion, but that would be something that I would teach in my classes. Why science itself is also constructed. Not constructed, but like science is also, it's also filtered through a social lens. But that's also my school of thought, and those are the theorists that I draw on, is that basically there is no universal objective truth out there. And we see that with the history of science. You know, with science having been like a tool of white supremacy, and like the discipline of phrenology, which is like measuring brains and things like that. Like science has a dark history and is like, can be totally tied to fascism. So there's no like, you know, back in the 19th century when they were saying like the brains of like Jews or like black people are like smaller or something, like that's quote unquote science, but that changed, right? So it goes to show that the research of science, there's people behind it as well, and science can be manipulated and it can be used like in different ways. So that's why it's so important. I find like it's so important to always add and contextualize everything within a social science layer. Like we need social science to complement science, because otherwise we'll end up with this situation where we think science is like law and above everything, but science can just as well be problematic. I know that's a lot for me to like question. I feel like everything I'm just like a professional questioner. I will question my job. That's my job, is to question everything. And it can feel like, oh shit, like what is real, what is not real. But I think it's important to also question, because, and then, you know, when you're wondering like what is real, what is not real, like bring it back to your own questions, your own like situation, that helps as well. Practice and healthy discernment to balance that. Yeah, discernment is so important. Yeah, the whole idea, I really like this idea, Liliana, the whole idea of capital T truth, 100%. We see it's dangerous in spirituality, in New Age spirituality. Like a lot of New Age frameworks try to claim this like capital T truth. When you look at different frameworks, like I've learned from like indigenous philosophies that there is no capital T truth, and that like so much of it is like filtered through subjective experience, and there is a possibility of different truths. And my framework, like my theoretical framework, is that there is no capital T truth, because whatever exists, whatever we see existing, is a product of power and power relations. I know that's very meta, but when we like in a classroom setting with me, we explore what that means, because it's quite complex. It's based on like Foucault and contemporary like philosophy. Like everything's a product of intersections. Yeah, that got really theoretical. Manifestation, manifesto, activism, arrow. Are you saying manifestation is leading to manifesto? I'm just going through the comments here. Yeah, like I mean, this is something to do, like I'm gonna ask the community this, like what do you do when there's like trolls in the room? Like, more pickles please. Like, it's really not, you know, like your questions are, I don't know if you're still here, but your questions are really for like I don't know. If you have advice on how to deal with trolls, let me know. Some aspects of manifestation, Sarah Laverty, you're saying some aspects of manifestation can be useful in activism, visioning, expanding awareness of patterns. Yeah. No, this is really important. Like, this is really good. Sarah, you and I have had like good discussions in the comments as well. Like, there are aspects of manifestation that are helpful. Semantically, I just wouldn't call it manifestation. I call it like dream work. I call it consciousness raising, consciousness shaping. And it's not me. It's like, that's how like revolutionary movements have called them as well. Like in the feminist movement in the 60s and 70s, like women used to organize these circles where they would like, gather into these like community groups of all women, and they would look at their vaginas. They would hold up a mirror to their vaginas and just like look at it and like embrace it, because living in a patriarchal society meant that they were entirely disconnected from their sexuality and their bodies were just like existing for the male gaze and male pleasure. So that's what you're talking about, right? Visioning, awareness, discussion, education. These are all really, really, and like community building. What I love about consciousness raising is that it feels like it's a collective project. People are doing it together, and there's this like bigger vision, and the vision is a breathing document. Like, people are thinking together. Manifestation feels like a little bit more individualistic. It's like you are in your corner and you're like at home and you're, doing your own visualization. Not to say that that's bad. Like, visualization is so important. And like, I personally, I have a therapist and I have a coach, and with the coach, that's what we do. We do more like future oriented things, and like we think about, my patterns and how to change them. And like, she gives me like little tricks and things like that, like tools to use. Incredibly useful. But the manifestation law, the law of attraction, like the language of manifestation goes farther than that. It says that basically you can, by doing that work, you're going to attract a different reality. You're going to attract something towards you, and you're going to be able to change your reality. And that's the part that I really take issue with, because that appeals mostly to white middle class, WASP people, because that's the truth. Like, there are so little social barriers for people for that specific, population to achieve what it is that they want, that it really does feel like it's just a question of thoughts. It just feels like it's a question of thinking differently and changing your behavior. But that's not the experience of most people who experience intersectionality and like social barriers differently. Let me see. Yeah, spirituality doesn't exist in a vacuum, and there's a lot of hidden spiritual beliefs in science. That's very true. That kind of goes in the direction of saying that like science itself is a product of people and beliefs, and how like the results that come, and even the way research is shaped. There's a French theorist that writes about this called Bruno Latour. So if you want to read about like the politics of science, that would be a really good book. Yeah. I think it's important for people who are, in the spiritual space to embrace like what you're saying, Priestess Pendragon, like your truth isn't everyone else's. And so to zoom out, like in terms of the frameworks that are being used, I would want to make sure that the frameworks we're using are also not like propagating this universality, and instead embracing this like more specific, and I think there are poetic and empowering ways to do that, and not like it doesn't, like, not being universal doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think it can be a really good thing. Yeah. The clean vessel. I haven't seen that, but it does map onto the obsession with purity that we see in spiritual spaces. That teachers, I don't know if any of you like saw the Teal Swan documentary, but there's a scene where one of the attendees of that workshop that she was hosting was asking her if she had any mentors of her own. and she was basically like got really defensive, and she's like, I don't have any mentors, like I don't need a mentor. And I think it contributes to this idea that spiritual leaders have to be in this like godlike position. So that's, I would say, like, watch out for that. Like, you want to make sure that the people that you're following advice from and stuff, or that if you're in a position of giving advice, like, make sure there's no, or I would question the idea of omniscience, like this godlike positionality, because it sets up for this idea of superiority. If you're positioning yourself as a god in the space that you're in, you're untouchable. You're also unquestionable. No one can question you. No one can push against you. So it just already creates this dynamic that's cultic. Hi, Faith T. I'm glad that you like the theory part. Cool. And if you do that, my workshops are like more theory. New Age has ruined spiritual terms and concepts. So hard to talk about these things now. Absolutely. I think there is such a difference between New Age and like non-New Age spirituality. But interestingly, New Age is what's gained so much prominence. And it's because a lot of New Age folks are also excellent marketers and business people that use New Age as a target audience to sell whatever it is that they're selling. It's part of the spiritual capitalism. Hi, Ophelia. So yeah, it's there's so much outside of that world. That's actually, like, when I started my spiritual journey, I have a mentor of mine. I really, really like her, and she's been a witch for multiple, like, her mom was a witch, grandma was a witch, and she's based in Atlanta, and I've learned so much from her. I like learned about graveyard magic and like protection magic and candle magic, and she charges, I think, like $100 for a 4-week or like 6-week course. Like her prices are really accessible. I've had a lot of like really good mediumship experiences with her, and it's never felt toxic. It's felt so wholesome. Like, I reached out to her when I was having a lot of struggles with like being accepted as queer by my family, and she was so supportive, and she was like, your ancestors love you. They're so proud of you. Like, at a time where I thought that I was like disappointing my alive family, like knowing that generations of ancestors were looking over me and proud of me, that's exactly what I needed, you know? So it's just, so much of spirituality is so beautiful and empowering and loving. Like, she basically helped hold the container for me to remember that I'm worthy of love at a time where my parents were rejecting me, you know what I mean? So it's much better now. It was like a long struggle, but it's much, much better now. But, you know, like, the New Age spirituality that we're talking about is a lot more specific, and it has its red flags for a reason, you know, and it's very different than this other kind of spirituality. Have you seen the whole New Earth thing? I'm seeing it a lot in the left, but it seems to me like New Age version of the rapture. People are even talking about people getting left behind. I have seen the New Earth. I've never interpreted it as a left thing. I've always, like, for me, it's part of the New Age to far right pipeline. But it would be interesting if you were to send me like some sources that are explicitly saying that this is leftist, because to me, it resonates a lot with the right-wing language of the Great Reset. I don't know if you've heard about this Great Reset. And yes, it does sound a lot like the rapture, but it's this idea that the world is like changing completely, and we got to prepare for it. We got to prepare for that shift. And I mean, like, let's be honest, the world is changing, and social scientists are talking about that as well. But the difference between the way that it's being talked about in spiritual spaces and the way that it's being talked about in academic spaces is that in academic spaces, there is no fear mongering, and there is no like language of like, I'm awakened and I'm enlightened because I know that the shift is coming and therefore I'm preparing for it. So like from a social science perspective, we really are seeing like fissures in like capitalism. We're seeing the, you know, kind of like the fall, like the gradual fall of like US imperialism or the US power, the power of the United States. We're seeing the rise of China. But and you know, like empires rise and fall all the time. But is it reason for fear mongering and for manipulation? That's what we're seeing in these spaces. So New Earth, I had a brief moment dabbling in human design. So if any of you are like human design people or like we're in that space, holler. But one thing that I saw in human design was this like obsession with 2027. And this idea that like we were preparing for 2027, and like we like folks who did human design and were into human design were like that was part of the work of like preparing yourself for like that shift, and like the Mayas had predicted that shift. And it's just like on Conspirituality podcast, which I highly recommend, like the host was basically saying like conspiracy theories simulate social science. They're not social science. They simulate it. Like they simulate research as well. So it feels like there's something real to it. And it's because it's kind of like mirroring like actual news, but it's being packaged and it's used for a different purpose. Yeah. So I feel like all this language of like New Earth, it's just like, it's part of that pipeline. Hi, Brigitte. Thoughts on visualization versus escapism? Oh my God, I love this question. By Faith T. I think visualization is good. Like, I think, So, like for like a bigger, like zoomed out thing, like we live in capitalism. And capitalism is not just like an economic system that exists outside. It also affects our lives. And so we also experience internalized capitalism. So what I'm seeing with the world of visualization and meditation and journaling is that it creates this idea that we're not enough the way that we are. Like we're not enough just like existing as we are, and that we need to be maximizing our time with all these different like self-help tools. So that's the thing, like self-help can be helpful, but then there comes a point where it's not helpful anymore, and it becomes also a source of stress. Like if we have so many things to do on our list all the time, and we feel like every single moment in our life needs to be filled with like a different thing, then, you know, it just adds more to our list. So visualization, it can be nice, it can be helpful, but it can also be a thing that we feel like we have to do. And if we don't do it, we're just not going to be able to like live the life that we want, or that somehow we're failing because we're not visualizing or we're not journaling. So that's my fear, with my concern rather, with a lot of these spaces that give you a lot of things to do, because it just reproduces this capitalistic idea that you have to maximize your time and that you have to optimize every single thing that you're doing. Okay, like I finished my work, now I'm going to journal, now I'm going to do this. It's like just be and exist and play and have fun. And not every moment has to be shadow work. Not every moment has to be like deep, like diving into the bottom of the ocean of yourself. So again, like it's that balance, and visualization can absolutely like lead to escapism, especially when it's used as this tool for like, oh, visualization is your ticket to attracting a different reality, or it's your ticket to bending reality or timeline jumping. You need to start with that work of visualizing 5-10 minutes every day. I'm like, what, like, I've experienced this in spirituality, where I started feeling really guilty about myself because I was not doing all the things that I was quote unquote supposed to be doing. And it created this like relationship to my own self that was a little bit conflictual. Like I would get mad at myself. I would feel bad. I'd feel guilty. I felt like I was failing. So that's also on visualization. Is like it can be like helpful if someone wants to do it, but it's also absolutely like not necessary. And it can like when it's being prescribed as a tool for manifestation, I think that's where we're starting to kind of like invite this dissociation from reality. Yeah. New Agers talk about 5D, but really it's 2D. Thoughts and ideas separates from reality. Yet they preach unity. Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of like dissociation from reality that's being encouraged. And we're seeing that a lot, like in this moment of the Roe overturn. Like it's been so interesting watching how some spiritual coaches and influencers are responding. And the way that they're responding is so bypassy. Either it's like complete silence, either it's like these double meanings. I talked about these like vague double meanings that can be interpreted a million different ways depending on who's in the audience. Like it's not a coincidence that they're choosing vagueness over precision. Yeah, and it's like this idea of just like focus on your thoughts, and like what about reality? Yeah. I'm gonna scroll a little bit down. Yeah. Ophelia, it's the Teal Swan one. The one where, yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. The one where she gets questioned by one of her followers and got super defensive about not having a mentor. Like Teal Swan doesn't need a mentor. Because that's basically saying like, does God need someone above him? Like, God is God, right? It's exactly that. Yeah. I think not being universal makes us listen better to each other. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Visualization is really just a person collective being able to recognize a better reality. I like that. And I like to call it also dream work as well. We have to dream together. We have to dream about a better future. We have to dream, and then we have to get organized, and we have to be cohesive, and we have to work together. That's all very important. Yeah. So how are we doing? I feel like I'm talking a lot. And we didn't even get to talk about gender, which is why I'm here. Do we yeah. Brigitte is asking what's the difference between visualization and imagining. I'm assuming that I probably answered that already when I was talking. Yeah. Imagining is important. Yeah. I also think that like imagining has a little bit more of a kinder feeling to it. Visualization, because of like how it's being used in manifestation spaces, it feels like homework. It feels like you're gonna fail if you don't do it. It feels like it's something you have to do. And from a capitalist like an analysis lens, to me it's just like an extension of maximizing your time and your free time. And I'm all about protecting your free time. And if in your free time it feels good to visualize, like go ahead and do that. But you don't need to be carving out 5 to 10 minutes in your day to visualize. Like with imagination, you can be imagining at all times, and it doesn't have this like rigidity to it. You can be imagining in community. Right now together, we can be imagining. Imagining is also like a building up, like whatever I'm saying right now can also contribute to your imaginations, so that, you know, you come out of this discussion feeling like you like I activated something in your imagination. Imagination is also like sharing with each other and growing with each other. Visualization, it really feels, it maps onto this like destination that we want. And so many times that destination that's encouraged by these spiritual coaches is a materialistic destination. Like being a millionaire, I'm just going to visualize that reality. I'm going to visualize having more clients. And yeah, I don't want to say that that's a bad thing, but for me, I'm sharing how it affected me. It made me feel bad about myself. So I kind of stopped it. So I Live Lucid is saying it's true but not true at the same time. I feel like I'm a bit behind on the comments. I don't really, you must have said built on something I said and I don't know exactly. Soul knows the truth of what you want. They say no negative thoughts. People can't help that. Yeah, of course. Negative thoughts are, you know, it's yeah, negative thoughts and like the what's being deemed as negative in new age spaces is a whole other topic. I've been like researching the emotional frequency scale because a lot of people in light of the overturn have been quoting the frequency scale, and they've been saying like you shouldn't feel grief, or don't feel angry, or don't feel frustrated, or don't feel fear, because those are low vibration. So you want to make sure that you're at a higher vibration because the system wants you to be low. I don't know, like all sorts of things that I'm eventually going to do a video about. Yeah, accountability is really important. But you know, folks who are in godlike positions don't like to be accountable and will refuse accountability and will double down on whatever, you know, framework that they're using that is potentially toxic. Yeah. Yeah, Brigitte saying any ethical tradition has mentors and elders to keep us accountable. Absolutely. You know, mentors and elders that are, you know, they're like the memory of the community, so they remember. They're historians, they're oral historians, they're theologians, they're teachers, they're philosophers. You know, they're all these things at the same time. What are effective ways to create change in our personal life? I don't think I'm the most qualified to answer this question. I feel like if I'm like in a position of like thought leadership, I'm going to stick to what I know, which is like philosophy and theory, and using that for new age. But I can share that personally, what has helped me create change in my personal life was actually to do less spirituality. Because I kind of got sucked into it, and I was doing so much that it was causing me anxiety. I was starting to feel like I was a failure. I felt like I was getting mad at myself for not being able to stay consistent. And like consistency is a thing that gets really pushed. Like you need to be consistent in order to be successful. And so I had to take a step back from that entire world, which is why I'm also here, because I was able to, and I had the support to kind of like pull me away from being so deep in it. And I realized that I was so serious. I was like, I think being in spiritual space, it made me so serious. I was always doing shadow work. I was always like being in this like really serious relationship to myself. And I realized that I needed to play more, and I needed to just be more. And playing was really important. Actually, TikTok was a big part of my playfulness. I would just like get in front of, at that time I only had like 50 to 100 followers. I would just get in front of the camera and do a little dance, and it was my self-care. And like dancing was a huge part of it. Cooking, baking, taking walks, laughing, having fun with friends. That was all really important in helping me just kind of feel more like myself and more connected to myself, and also just like asking for support. You know, getting help, like therapy was really helpful. Getting a coach was really helpful. Like knowing that I don't have to go through this alone, and that knowing that I need like people to process with. So did it create change? I don't know. I still don't know what I want to do with my life. I feel very uncertain on that regard. But I have support, you know, I have a partner, my parents live here, like I feel very supported. And, you know, I have other resources like, you know, a therapist and things like that. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say about like that question, creating effective change. For me, it was playing more, and realizing, like remembering to have fun, just be with my own self. Yeah, definitely. Sizzle raw anger, frustration, so important to changing the status quo. I feel like we really tried to harp on that message in the last few videos that I posted. Like people are allowed to feel fear. Yeah. Oh, like Brigitte is saying, you have experience with this, with creating effective change. Definitely, everyone, I highly recommend you go take a look at Brigitte's work. Brigitte is awesome. We went live together last week, or like 2 weeks ago or something. And I'm going to try to like upload the replay. I have been uploading replays of the lives to my YouTube channel, so you can watch them whenever you want. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited that you're here, friend. There are too many letters and numbers in your name, but you're saying about gender. Trans/NB, non-binary person here, tired of spirituality being marketed to the binary. I think this is really good. Like, I want to spend the last 15 minutes talking about gender and why I think so much of the new age gender construct is repackaged patriarchy and is rooted in trans erasure. I started by saying this at the beginning, it's not enough to just slap on collective pronouns and say oh, I'm gender inclusive because I use they, them, or to say my argument is that the idea of masculine and feminine qualities, how some it's a very widespread argument that masculine and feminine doesn't have to map onto a person's gender. It doesn't have to map onto a person's sex, biological sex. It's just an energy. That argument, I still think we can do better than that. I think it's a cop-out to just say oh, we're still gonna talk about masculine, feminine. It's just an energy. Why, the words and the concept of masculine and feminine mean very specific things. So doubling down on that binary, even if it's a talk about an energy, it can also contribute to that erasure, especially because non-binary and trans people's lived experience is blending and messing with that binary. So why are we resorting to that neatness when actually reality is so much more messy? Why are we resorting to a binary when we could be thinking differently and in spectrum thinking, for example? But if we're going to do spectrum thinking, then we're going to have to think of alternatives to masculine and feminine, because feminine, masculine, it means something very specific. And that's one thing. And then the second thing is that's again, to the point of universality. We have to look at the culture of a space. There are spaces, spiritual spaces, that use the divine feminine and masculine. But if you just spend 10 to 15 seconds on their page, you know that it's just basically, it's reflecting and telling a cis story, and it's telling a cis patriarchal story. So that's the thing with universality. It's you say that you're collective, you say that you're universal, but then when you actually look at it in practice, it's just reinforcing cisgendered and patriarchal norms. So that's what I mean about why it's important for us to get concrete and to get tangible, because you can say something and then in practice it's totally different. You can say that you're your masculine, your feminine are just energy, but then when you look at it, how it's being applied, it's just all men and women. And the divine masculine means man and the divine feminine means woman. And divine masculine looks classic definitions of masculinity. It's strong, brave, courageous. It's also used to it's the structure, whereas the feminine is the flow, it's receptive. Why are we kidding ourselves? And folks get really defensive and they'd be no, this can be for everyone. I'm but it's not. The description of what you're describing is so neat. You're just putting two genders into two boxes and you're reinforcing those patriarchal expectations, but you're repackaging it as spiritual. So this is what we're gonna unpack a lot more in Saturday's workshop. What the hell is going on with the divine feminine, the divine masculine? We're also gonna look at the dark feminine. What's up with the dark feminine? Why is that also a little bit icky? Why can it, and how, and why I think some people have made great arguments as to why it is potentially empowering. So we're also going to look at the concept of embodiment. There's a huge emphasis in the spiritual world about embodiment. I don't know if you've seen it, embodied motherhood, embodied this, embodied that. A lot of it is so rooted in a cis experience. And it's not to say that sometimes I get the feminist, I get a quote unquote feminist argument, which is oh, but so many spaces have shunned women before. So these spaces are really important so that women can experience and tap into what it means to be a woman. But it's not like, that's not really the most empowering and like strong feminist argument, because what it means to be a woman is very narrowly defined in these spaces. A lot of times what it means to be a woman is very much like, being a woman means having kids, means it's like connecting to your womb. It means, being a mother and like being connected to the earth and to your period. And like, do we not realize how, like traditional this is, and how it doesn't reflect the entirety of like what being a woman can look like? And if we're not talking about the diversity of like what being a woman is, then, and if we're attaching like womanhood to childbearing, like, there's nothing feminist about that. That's exactly the definition of patriarchal womanhood that has been celebrated. The only way that women have been able to exist in this world has been as childbearing, thing, like, so, and again, like, it's so cis to say like being a woman equals having kids. It's super rooted in there's like trans women's erasure as well, and their experience of femininity and womanhood. So it's so important to zoom out and like talk about the blind spots of these frameworks. So this is the argument here, is that the framework itself needs to be revised. I mean, like, I'm seeing an interaction between Kat and I Live Lucid about neurodivergent people in Hi Cowgirl in LA. I feel like that's not, it's not a theory until you have evidence, and until you have a sample size, and until you're able to like interview and research people, like, and so I would be careful with how you're framing that and phrasing that, whichever you're saying, because we're risking falling into this. I mean, we're falling into this like overgeneralization, and like, who is it serving? Like, that's the thing. Like, also, like, why is this hypothesis resonating with you? What's the intention behind it? Also, I would add to that. And I would also say that, like, from the comments that the comments that have been left on my account, a lot of these theories, a lot of new age spirituality can aggravate, and because it's so focused on like being super in control of your thoughts. Like, I think it's ableist in that sense of like, it's completely erasing the experience of people who live with their thoughts differently and have a different experience. So it's like this assumption that we all operate in the same way, and we all have this like rational, it's rooted in rationality, and rationality is a very colonial concept. This idea that like we have to dominate and control our minds, and we have to be in charge over our body, and we have to live in our minds. Like, that obsession with rationality like ends up hurting everybody. But yeah, there's a lot of like ableistic neurodivergency erasure of different ways of living this world, and that, so that's also like another thing I'll say about new age spirituality. And I really appreciate that your discussion between you two is like supportive and respectful. That's really good. I really want to make sure that like everyone is like safe to share what you're thinking about, like what's going on, and we're here to learn from each other and make each other better, and like workshop things with each other. So I'm just like going through the. So, Kat, you had a spiritual mentor who used toxic methods, and you question everything. Yeah, I had a toxic health and wellness coach. I haven't really spoken about that, but like I really want to do more content about like toxic health and wellness. because that's my most lived experience has been with like working with a coach who made me afraid of all food, and that like encouraged me to ban everything, and I starved myself and like lost a lot of weight, and I'm currently like on a diet recovery journey, and it was really hard for me to even realize that I was put on a diet or that I was dieting. I thought that I was being healthy. But like so much of the health and wellness world is actually diet, and it's recoding diet into like health. And it's this idea that like if you're the thinner you are, the healthier you are, and it's like so messed up. I am healthier now, and I've gained so much weight, and I love where I'm at because I feel healthier. I feel like I have more energy and all that stuff. But yeah, like toxic coaches are really do exist. The sacredness of boundaries applies to androgynous folks, but not NBs who are outside the binary. Babylon Jasmine, I don't really understand. It's not clear to me what you're saying here. Yeah. Brigitte, Hedge Rider, masc and femme only root into cultural definitions. Yeah, exactly. There is no masculine and feminine outside of how we as a society read into it. So even like, I find that these like spiritual, like divine feminine and masculine spaces have gotten so good at like getting around and like finding like circuitous methods to talk about man and woman, husband and wife. But they're not saying husband and wife. They're saying, I have a masculine wound because I was too much in my, like, you know what I mean? Like that language, but it's basically saying I'm wounded because I was operating too much like a man. Like literally today someone sent me a video about someone, like a coach was telling her following that bodybuilding is too much masculine, and that you want to like not be, you want to take a break of bodybuilding because too much masculine is gonna wound you. Like, how is that not reminiscent of like 1950s like sexist language saying like if a woman works in a male workspace, or if a woman's around too many men, she's gonna be masculine. Or if a woman does like masculine sports, she's gonna be masculine. Like, what does this even mean that you're too much and you're masculine? So we're gonna deconstruct all of this. If I get into so Kat is saying, if I get into twin flame theory / experience, a call to deprogram heteronormativity. I need to know more about that. I don't know a lot about twin flame. I know folks have been asking me to research it, so I will research it. Light-dark dichotomy is racist. Yeah, potentially. Yeah, for sure. Especially like at one point I was studying like medieval Christian, and when like medieval Christianity in Europe like started being obsessed with like the devil, and that the devil was black, and this obsession with like light and dark, like it definitely has a racist history, and it can be used in these like racial terms. These dichotomies are, you know, first of all, dichotomies themselves are problematic. Duality is interesting. Like we can look at duality, but there's a difference between duality and binary. I'll say this again. There's a difference between duality and binary. Duality is like two forces that are kind of like meshing and intertwining and creating something new. A binary is just two separate categories. And usually in a binary, there's one that's better and one that's not as good. So when you think of feminine, masculine, masculine is the better one, feminine is the lesser one. So binary already creates this like hierarchy. So in light and dark, light is better, dark is not so good. And so it like maps onto these things. Yeah. I wrote right. Okay, I just want to say I love you all. Like, I'm really enjoying reading the comments and reading the collaboration that's happening between you all as well. Like, as I'm talking, I'm super grateful. Can I explain more about rationality? You know what? I'm gonna write it down and we'll do another talk about this. And I'll talk about rationality in my workshop, my decolonization workshop in 2 weeks. It's just this idea of like mind over matter, and it is a very Western idea. It's you see it in Plato, you see it in Aristotle, but it's also been used in like colonial like as a colonial. It's been weaponized for colonization, and it's also very gendered. It's this idea that men are rational, but women are emotional, and so emotions are like feminized. Women are lunatics, like women are like hysterical, but men are rational. They're able to access their rational faculties. And that's why women were, like inferior, because they cannot access that rationality. So the history of rationality is sexist and Western and colonial. But we'll talk about that a lot more, because manifestation is also this idea of mind over matter. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Sizzle Roz washing dishes. I love that. Yeah, Des is saying rebranding toxic gender roles. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm saying, like, always like train your eye and your critical sense to go beyond the universality, because there is no such thing as universality. Universality usually means that there's a blind spot and that person's not seeing the blind spot and they're just like positing it as universal. So if you're in a space that's talking about divine feminine and masculine, like watch out for what they're actually saying, but also what they're actually doing. Like if these accounts are on TikTok, there's a video behind it, right? And in the video, I'm seeing a man and a woman, right? Or I'm seeing husband and wife. I'm seeing domesticity. I'm seeing motherhood and children. So it doesn't matter what you're saying and your claim to universality. It's what it is that you're portraying and what it is that you're not portraying. And the fact that you're claiming universality, to me, is just contributing to the erasure, or maybe like they just don't even see that there's other ways of existing that is not what they're promoting on their like website or whatever, on their like TikTok or social media or YouTube channels. Like that's also part of that like new age wellness far right pipeline, is that there is such a very specific way of existing, and it tends to be mostly white and cis and like family oriented, and these are all the elements that are being like promoted and like given a lot of airtime. And like we need to also acknowledge that what gets given airtime, these things have already been given airtime for centuries now at this point. So it's like we need to also be giving airtime to other voices, other ways of existing, other ways of experimenting and queering gender roles. Like that's what we need to be seeing on screen. So that's also like, like let's talk about divine feminine and masculine in that context. And most likely folks are not going to talk about masculine and feminine in that context, because it gets queered. Like even in queer circles, talking about masc and femme is very different than masculine and feminine. Masc and femme mean very different things. Right? Like if you look at queer categories for gender, there are queer categories of gender. There's like, and queer social, like queer expressions of gender. But they have different names, right? There's innovation happening in queer communities. And why is it so important to innovate with language? Because masculine and feminine as it stands now doesn't work. That's why you have like butch, and that's why you have like other, other like butch queen and femme queen, and you have all these like innovative categories that some of them like don't belong to me specifically, like butch queen, femme queen, like this is like from Black trans women. So like we need to be innovating. We need to be coming up with our own categories, or our own language or different language, as opposed to doubling down on masculine and feminine, which already has so many Like it's so patriarchal already. It's attached to the patriarchy. Yeah. Yeah. Hedge rider. I see it a lot too. Cis women talking about being too much in their masculine energy. And it's probably a symptom of wanting to reconnect to their like softer side, or like wanting to reconnect to themselves. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. Like, of course we want to reconnect to ourselves, but the question is, why are you disconnecting? Why are you feeling disconnected? You're not feeling disconnected because you're too much in your masculine. You're feeling disconnected because like capitalism is exhausting you, because you're expected to show up in like toxic patriarchy. You know, like these are the things that are disconnecting you. There is no masculine wound. You're burnt out and you're exhausted by men. Men suck. Like, and it's hard to feel like you can embrace your femininity and being a woman in a patriarchy. Like that makes sense to me. Like, of course, that's what patriarchy means. Like being a woman, you get treated like you get treated like shit, you know, in a lot of places. So I get that you want to feel empowered. But is it actually empowering? Like that's the thing. And it might feel empowering to some, but you know, is it universal? Absolutely not. Yeah. I'm just reading. Yeah. I Live Lucid saying people not spiritual can be lovely. I'm sure that this is part of a bigger discussion that I'm like glossing over, but I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for holding the space to think and question. You're so welcome, Shine24. I'm so happy you're here. Yeah, it's so interesting, like the history of lunatic, of that word, because it does connect to the moon and moon cycle period. So it's like, oh, women are so cyclical. Every month they have this thing that makes them like turn like crazy. So therefore, they're not in charge of their own like rational faculties. Therefore, men need to be in charge of them. Like that's the progression of the logical. Yeah. Patriarchy fails everyone because it's hard to live in an extreme of binary gender. Yes. And also patriarchy fails everyone because it's like actually creating barriers for women to like succeed and feel uplifted and like, you know, experience upward mobility. And there's like a wage gap. And, you know, women, when you look at boards and when you look at like the high strata of society, it's still mostly men. And if there are women, they're all white women. So we still live in a society where it's harder to be a woman than to be a man. So there's still a lot of like sexism, and none of that has disappeared. It's still all there. Hi Amanda, I hope you're still here. Hello. Yeah, so I am so sorry about here, let me close my window. Okay. I feel like, oh my God, I sweat so much, it's so hot. I feel like we're wrapping up, right? Like I feel like we've gotten to a good spot to kind of close. Right? Do we have any remaining questions before we wrap up? And this will be available on my YouTube, and my YouTube channel, my fledgling baby channel is available on my profile. Yeah, so we feel good. I feel like we had a really good discussion. We started with gender. We started talking about gender, and then we diverted. We talked about leadership. We talked about expertise. So if you haven't seen that part yet, we talked about frameworks of leadership, like whether it's okay and how we can also embrace being messy and not having it all figured out and still be able to help folks with the tools that we are familiar with, that we've learned. We also talked about universality and why universality has so many issues. It's Western, it's colonial, and it's hurting us. So how we can, decenter universality and acknowledge instead our positionality, and when we do that, it's a lot easier for us to embrace questions, for us to invite reflection, and for us to also like acknowledge that, you know, certain theories might need work or tweaking in order to be more inclusive and supportive and empowering. And there was some lovely discussions also happening between you all that I wasn't able to keep track of, but I also want to say that I really enjoy like the atmosphere of collaboration and nurturing that is in this, you know, like live/classroom setting. I think it's so important that we welcome each other at whatever stage of learning that we're at. And then we finished with more unpacking of divine feminine and masculine and like queering ways of that. And yeah, this was all to also introduce you to the workshop I'm teaching on Saturday, which is going to be a mix of like theory, kind of like what we did now, but like more formal with a PowerPoint presentation and actual like notes, and we'll be diving deeper. And then there will also be a practical element. I'll be pulling examples that we can analyze, that we can deconstruct. And I also, if you want to bring your own work, pieces of writing that we can workshop together, that's also going to be part of the workshop. Yeah, I still have 3 more classes this summer, the decolonial summer school that I'm doing. So I have the gender inclusive coaching this Saturday, and in 2 weeks, the intro to decolonization. And then in August, I'm doing another sex and gender workshop, which is like more, it's going to be even more theory. So the one that I'm doing this Saturday is sliding scale from 70 to 90 because it's for coaches. And of course, like no one will be turned away for lack of funds. So if you want to participate and that's beyond your price range, like please come. Like I would rather you come and just pay what you can. And then the other 2 workshops that I'm doing on decolonization and unpacking sex and gender are $45. They're actually sliding scale from $22 to $45. And they're going to be 3 hours long, and you'll have access to the replay. So that's going to be that. And I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to be offering courses after this. I might offer like one self-paced one. So this might actually, I think this might be the last few like live classes I'm going to do in a while. And then I might transfer more to self-paced because I'm learning, you know, this is a learning process for me. I love these workshops, but I don't really love like the selling aspect of it. So I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to keep doing this for, you know, I might just like just make it self-paced, and then you can just like buy it and just like on my website. But, I'll keep experimenting. Like this is part of what it means to be transparent and open with you all. And yeah, I love you all so much. Thanks for attending. And I'll see you all soon. On the next live. Bye. Oh wow, I love that you're adding some ideas. Maybe a monthly membership that has some of these classes. That would be very cool. Yes, I have been thinking about that. I'm not entirely sure if that would, like, I'm thinking right now, honestly, I think I might start with like one self-paced course that folks can purchase whenever, with access to an online community. So that you can talk to each other, anyone who's in the class, and you can talk to each other, respond to each other. I could go live within that community as well and answer specific questions. I think an online community would be cool too, because if you're like going through something, if you're working on something and you want my eyes on it, you want my feedback on it, that would be cool. So I think that's something what I'm thinking about. Like the intro, I did an intro to toxic spirituality like in June, a few weeks ago, and it went really well. And there's like over 3 hours of course material. So I might have it like packaged as a self-paced thing. You go through it at your own pace. And as you're processing, you'll have the community, and we can all, but then at the same time, I also have like all these other courses. I have like over 15 hours of courses for you all. There's like the gender, there's the decolonization, there's like colonialism, there's, you know, like specific tips for coaches. Like I'm just so overwhelmed. So I might just like roll it out slowly. But yeah, class with the membership would be awesome. Oh, I'm so glad that that's resonating. And if any of you have taken my class, the intro to toxic spirituality, or any of the classes that you'll take this summer, I'll just give you access to the community and the course. Like, of course, it's just that like this summer is kind of like the incubator. It's kind of like the testing. So you'd be part of like the testing phase. And then, yeah, and then things will be slowly rolled out. It's a lot of work, and I'm just me. So yeah, I'll keep you all posted. And if you have more ideas for me on how I could get this information in front of people, you know, I would love to hear. Like, this is also me asking for support, because I'm not gonna have it all figured out. Sorry, I feel like I'm losing my voice. So okay, bye everyone. Thanks for listening. Much love. This will be available on YouTube whenever you want to rewatch. Sorry. Have a good evening. Ciao.